in just a little while. So let's jump straight into the newspapers this morning because the Washington Times is first on my list. And we're going to take a look at what they have to say. Suspicious Republicans seek Pelosi's January 6 data is the headline. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is concealing information about her culpability in the security breakdown during the January 6 riot, according to Republican lawmakers who've been pursuing those documents since immediately after the attack on the U.S. Capitol. It's a slightly biased story on the front of a slightly biased newspaper. As we know, the Washington Times is, of course, like the New York Post, a conservative news carrier. Representative Rodney Davis of Illinois said Mrs. Pelosi is stonewalling. He's at the top of the he's the top Republican on the House Administration Committee, which oversees the management of the Capitol complex. The Sergeant at Arms and the director of the Speaker has refused to provide us their communications surrounding January 6. I believe those records will show there was a lot of communications and coordination between the Speaker's office and law enforcement officials leading up to and on January 6, Mr. Davis wrote in a statement on Tuesday to the Washington Times. Yeah, you can guarantee what that communication was. Where the hell are you? That's what it probably was. It's very interesting to me. I have been looking at security around the Capitol building now to see what they've beefed up. And they claim it's beefed up now. You know, you can't get in there unless, you are authorized. But security specialists, including a former sergeant at arms, retired, has said that there is no perimeter. There is still no perimeter to the Capitol building, i.e., a separate wall outside, a fencing or anything. There's nothing. The only preventative for getting in is at the door. And that is not really, as most security specialists would tell you, that is not a helpful way to prevent another insurrection. They basically haven't done anything to protect the U.S. Capitol other than increase staff. It's just beggars belief, It's, if anything, like building a wall around it would be a symbol of the day, a symbol of what happened and what is possible that could happen. Strange. Anyway, I appreciate there's an argument that it's the people's house and therefore it should be available, but, the times have changed. And it's going to happen again. Don't think it won't. Ports bases to strengthen China's power. Beijing aims for global dominance with commerce military network. It says, China is expanding a network of more than 95 port facilities around the world and is working to establish a system of overseas military bases that analysts say will support Chinese President Xi Jinping's announced ambition for global dominance. The port network is part of Mr. Xi's Belt and Road Initiative, a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure and development program that Beijing has been pushing for nearly a decade in an effort to cement its status as an economic superpower and win support in the developing world for China's brand of communism. This is just garbage. It's just garbage. What China is doing is trying to get Chinese goods, to the rest of the world as quickly as possible. That's why it's built 95 port facilities around the world. That's why it's invested. In Long Beach, California, I'm sure there's Chinese investment. We have a huge in England on the kind of east coast of England. We have one of the largest container ports in the world, and it's all paid for by the Chinese. Of course it is, because they want to get their goods into the UK, which is a hub for the rest of Europe. I don't know that we should be using the Washington Times anymore. I just feel like it's just riddled with propaganda. Quad opens door to nations caught in China's grasp. South Korea conflicted on economy. And after domestic agenda collapses, Democrats look for way to build back. Yes, they claim Senate Democrats returned to Washington on Tuesday with their domestic agenda in shambles and searching for a way to save face. Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer is publicly pleading to continue work on President Biden's $1.75 trillion Build Back Better Act. Democratic leadership is stressing that social welfare and climate change package is by no means dead, despite intra-party opposition in a Congress with no margins for error. So there we go. There's the Washington Times. Some truth, some not so truth. Washington Post. Let's see if they can do a better job of the truth, or whether they're just peddling their agenda. Oh, I had a massive row yesterday with my racist landlord, by the way, about vaccines. He refuses to get vaccinated still. And so does his daughter. And I talked to them, and I referred to them as anti-vax, which was a mistake, because that immediately got their back up. And I said, but they said, we're not anti-vax. We've had loads of vaccines over the years. And I'm like, so why not this one? And they said, well, we just have a problem with the mRNA vaccine. And I was like, really? So you are anti-vax, because that is the vaccine that's saving everybody's lives. And she said, no, we're not anti-vaccine. And I said, well, take the vaccine then. They won't do it. They have been spoon-fed misinformation about mRNA. They've been told that it's a new technology. Well, they've been working on mRNA for decades, right? There's nothing new about it. They genuinely think it's a gene therapy. They've been told that it's a gene therapy. And for that purpose, they don't want it inside them. Fascinating, you know? And they also, the other thing is they just won't talk. They won't engage, you know? They won't discuss. They've seen these things on Facebook, and so they just think that, you know, they know something that I don't. I said to them, do you know how many vaccines, mRNA vaccines, have been administered now around the world? Do you know, Carlo? Shall I tell you the number? 9 billion. 9 billion doses. And, you know, it's more than 9 billion now since yesterday. More than 9 billion. You would have thought that after 9 billion doses and little to no side effects, they might have got the message that this is saving lives. I tweeted earlier this graph that shows the percentage of people dead from COVID-19 in red states rather than blue states. And it's really fascinating as a graph. Effectively, Republican governors are killing their own voters. It's this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. They want to win, gain support, take over the world, but their anti-vaccine mandates, or their anti-mandates of vaccines, their anti-social distancing policies, their anti-mask mandates, means that there are more people dead in Republican states than anywhere else. And the problem with that is that there'll be fewer conservatives left to vote because the governors are killing them all. It's like, can you not see what you're doing? Like, save your people. Not interested. They just want to own the libs. Oh, I found a great cartoon of a graveyard, and let me see what it is, because I saved it to my camera roll. It's a graveyard, and there's a speech bubble coming out of one grave, and it says, "We owned the libs," and the other speech bubble comes out, "Hell yeah, we did." And like, you know, that's they all died in the pandemic. We don't want this. We don't want people to die in the pandemic. We want everybody to live. That's the whole point. Look, this is the graph. I don't know if you can see this. This is the graph that shows the red is the states, the red states, and the blue is the blue states. And it's the number of deaths for each state from June through November. I mean, it's just beggars belief, you know. The data doesn't lie. This is data, and it doesn't lie. Let's look at the Washington Post. Post-vote vitriol surged in groups on Facebook. This is what we're going to discuss a little bit later. It said Facebook groups swelled with at least 650,000 posts attacking the legitimacy of Joe Biden's victory between Election Day and the January 6th siege on the US Capitol, with many calling for executions or other political violence. An investigation by ProPublica and the Washington Post has found. The barrage, averaging at least 10,000 posts a day, a scale not reported previously, turned the groups into incubators for the baseless claims supporters of President Donald Trump voiced as they stormed the Capitol, demanding he get a second term. I tell you who I saw on television yesterday who was trying to defend this. Peter Navarro. Do you remember him? He was the maverick medical advisor to the president during his, former president during his tenure. A complete crazy town guy, complete crazy town. And also talks with his hands like this in the most theatrical way. Fascinating. And he basically was, trying to explain about, how they tried to overturn the election. And he was doing it with a straight face on NBC News. So he was being interviewed about it. And he was like, yep, this is what we tried to do. He is convinced of his argument. Of course we would overturn the election. Of course we would. Because it was a fraud. And citing all of these fake things, about the count and the voting machines and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, you guys really believe this. You really believe this. It blew my mind, my tiny little mind. But yeah, Peter Navarro, he really is out there. He really is in another stratosphere of reality. His reality is not my reality, or hopefully anybody else's reality. But my worry is that, this guy had the ear of the president throughout. And he was one of the instigators. There's a very good new website that has started. I don't know if you're interested, if I can recommend it. Carla, you might like to take a look at it. It's called insurrectionindex.org. Insurrectionindex.org. And it's a new site that is a detailed listing of the people and organizations involved in the January 6th insurrection who it claims must be held accountable. And it's a very nicely laid out site, very clear to see. And it shows every congressman and woman, every person in every state who they have discovered has had some influence in the insurrection of January 6th and tried to overturn the certification of the vote. It's all there. Insurrectionindex.org. It's kind of fascinating to me. So we're going to talk more about the post-vote vitriol that surged on Facebook a little bit later. Labour churn is highest on record. They say that the labour market's record churn reached new heights in November. 4.5 million workers quitting or changing their jobs, the highest number in the survey's history. It was the fourth time in 2021 the number of workers quit reached a record, with previous highs in April, August and September. Workers took advantage of a hot jobs market with some 10.6 million job openings in the survey. I mean, it's wonderful numbers for Biden and Harris to celebrate. With I-95 reopened, blame is coming down hard. This is, of course, the Interstate 95 in Virginia. It reopened last night after a winter storm paralyzed vehicles for 48 miles south of Washington. It left people. I mean, I was listening to one woman. Her name was Rao, I think her surname. She was with her husband in the car for 16 hours. She sat in the car for 16 hours and nobody came. Nobody came to see if they were okay. No one brought them water or drinks or anything. Nothing. And it was freezing and they couldn't move. And they literally just passed the exit on the freeway and they couldn't back up and go because it was just thick, 12 inches of snow. Unbelievable. So the VDOT says storm defied forecasts. Travelers say state abandoned them. That's right, because the governor is being criticized for not calling the National Guard. Trump border policy keeps dividing. We're going to talk about this later as well. Another major story. But, there's always two sides to a story, So we're going to have a look at this in detail in just a little while. In Colorado, fires add to misery of a painful year. Story out of Boulder. There's an asphalt line that joins the city's two recent tragedies, binds them in an awful coincidence that will forever shape life. Highway 93 runs from northwest to Boulder from Louisville and Superior, a pair of comfortable suburbs that burned in a rare winter wildfire last week. Many of those who lost homes drove the road to shop here at King Soopers, where in March a 21-year-old man allegedly killed 10 people with an assault rifle in the market's grocery aisles. So, the tragedy, the shootings, the wildfires, the storms, the tornadoes. I mean, it's like America is really on its knees right now, isn't it? You know, the loss of democracy, the raging pandemic. You got the likes of Carl Rittenhouse getting off for murdering 2 people. It's just so backward. It's all so backward. Michael, thank you for joining us this morning. Welcome to the show. You're very welcome. Stacey is probably here as well. Oh, she is. It was seriously snowing in Amarillo. There you go, you see. Thank you, Stacey. Okay, let's move on with the newspapers this morning because we've got lots to get through. The Times-Union now from Albany, New York. Cuomo accuser blasts decision. Yes, Brittany Commisso, who accused Andrew Cuomo of groping her during a workplace encounter at the executive mansion, said on Tuesday that Tuesday's decision by the Albany County District Attorney David Soares' office to decline prosecution of the former governor offers an example of why many victims of sexual harassment remain silent. Soares issued a statement confirming that his office will drop its prosecution of Cuomo on a misdemeanor charge. Look, I feel the same about Donald Trump and anybody who's, a kind of white, rich male. They never get done. They never get prosecuted. They rarely get caught. I don't think Trump will ever go down for anything, ever. I just don't think he will. And I don't think Cuomo will either. They all seem to have, Jeffrey Epstein got done, that's true. And then Ghislaine, I was listening to her brother being interviewed the other day, and I was listening to how he said her name. Ghislaine Maxwell. I say Ghislaine, make it a little bit more common. But he says Ghislaine Maxwell. Her brother is in total denial, by the way. She has a couple of brothers, but oh my goodness, total denial. Seeing him being interviewed about how she didn't commit any crimes and just total denial. And that's a great kind of ethical dilemma, isn't it? This kind of concept of your sibling being caught up in this sex abuse crime. How do you as a sibling and your relationship with that person, how do you manage that kind of moral and ethical balance between accepting that this happened because it was proven in court versus that wanting to support your sibling and potentially lie for her? Davey, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Ozzy is also in the District of Columbia. Thank you. Lovely bunch of people this morning. Ghislaine, there you go. That's how you say it. Different paths led to Capitol breach. This is a story on the front of the Times-Union that says James Bonnet spread debunked conspiracy theories at work. Brandon Fellows rallied about fake news. William Tyron called for a modern-day revolution. A year ago, they could be any 3 faces in the capital region. A year later, they are easily recognizable as 3 local participants in the January 6th insurrection storming of the U.S. Capitol, now the subject of a congressional inquiry into an unprecedented intrusion marking one of the darkest days in modern American history. 5 deaths have been linked to the incident. Bonnet, Fellows and Tyron were among hundreds of staunch supporters of then-President Trump who descended on Washington to oppose the congressional certification of Trump's election defeat to now President Joe Biden. The crowd included militant right-wing extremists, adherents of QAnon conspiracy theories, white supremacists, and individuals stirred to act after hearing Trump's discredited claims of voter fraud. Yeah, I mean, let's not forget Trump was pushing this lie for years. I mean, literally, he started campaigning almost as soon as he got into office. And then 2 years before the November election is when he kind of started doing these election rallies, although arguably he was just doing them the whole time. And then the moment that people started to, I blame the media as well. They were asking him the kind of questions like, well, if you don't win, will you accept that result? And he would say, we'll have to see, which sows doubt. And then as you get nearer the election and, the polls are suggesting that it's neck and neck or he's slightly behind, then he starts saying, if I lose, it'll be because of election fraud. And then they start spinning all this stuff about election fraud, taking photos of bags of votes and saying that these votes were hidden under a table and that drop boxes weren't collected and they were overflowing. It was all propaganda. None of it was true. I was watching yesterday because, there's these kind of right-wing hashtags that go around. And there was one about Joe Biden last night and today, which I've been following because I really like to embed myself in conservative media. I feel like it's very important to know what's going on. And the hashtag that's doing the rounds today is No Plan Joe. That's what they're calling him. No Plan Joe, saying that he has no plan for dealing with coronavirus or indeed anything. And what they've done is he did a conference yesterday with all the governors from the states, a coronavirus conference. It was all done on video. And he was talking with a governor, and they were discussing in detail the plan that they formulated between them. And the governor was saying, at what point do the federal rules override the state rules? The plans done by the federal government. And he replied, and he said, well, there's no federal plan. Your state plan is what you do, and we support you with all this. Anyway, so the conservative media clipped that. They cut out the beginning bit where he was talking with the governor, and they just took the bit of Joe Biden saying there is no federal plan for coronavirus. And that went viral. And then that becomes a hashtag, No Plan Joe. So, and this is, unfortunately the modern media, isn't it? This is where you find that people will manipulate video. They did it on, what's the name of that late night show? It's so good. Hang on, let me have a look, because I think I posted something about it earlier. Give me a second. Here we go. It was the Daily Show, with Trevor Noah. And I really like Trevor Noah. He's a South African comedian. He's completely brilliant. And he, took over from John Thingy. And he's so good, right? But they post these mashup videos. They do these mashup videos. And so the one they posted yesterday was video of Fox News reporting on the Black Lives Matter protests, where they were referring to these, looters and protesters as rioters and saying, what a tragedy this is and all this stuff. And so what Trevor Noah's Daily Show did is they've replaced the video of these protests around the country, the BLM protests, with video of the insurrection. But they've made it still look like it's Fox News. So as you've got Tucker Carlson and this lot saying what a disaster this is and how terrible it is, they've used the footage of January 6th. So they've basically switched out the footage of the BLM protesters and replaced it with the insurrection. But they've made it look like it was broadcast on Fox News. And I tweeted a link to this, and I basically said, they called it Fox News talking about BLM protesters, but make the footage January 6th, right? So I posted, whilst clever and satirical, I actually think this kind of video mashup is very dangerous in the wrong hands. We must do better. Because the problem is, these mashup videos and these heavily edited videos now are becoming so commonplace, and they are so well done. The accuracy of the editing, the visual effects, it's so clever. Because you couldn't tell that Trevor Noah piece wasn't on Fox News. So I see the point that he's trying to make. He's trying to make a point that they will criticize the BLM protesters, but they won't criticize the insurrectionists. That's the point he's making. But the moment you mash up the video and you replace the video, you're effectively spreading misinformation. Because in the wrong hands, that video will go viral. And it'll be like, look what the Daily Show or the liberal media is doing, trying to make it look like we are reporting on something else. And it reminds me of that Michelle Obama line, they go low, we go high. And it's important to remain high. You can't go mashing up videos and kind of feel and expect there to be not to be a backlash. You just got to be truthful and accurate all the time. Okay, let's go back to the Times Union this morning. It's a New York newspaper. Report slams prison drug testing. It says thousands of prison inmates from across the state were for years unfairly punished, including some placed in solitary confinement after the company overseeing the system used to test for drugs in urine samples, flouted basic protocols, leading to a proliferation of false positive results. Prisoners were disciplined for positive drug tests without being given second tests to confirm the initial findings. So there we go. And also, big spike follows school break. It says, reflecting record-shattering community infection rates, Capital Region school districts reported unprecedented COVID-19 levels among students and employees on the first day back from the holiday recess. More than 2,500 cases were reported by local K-12 schools on Monday, following a 10-day break in reporting. So there we go. That's how the Times Union presents itself this morning. Oh, Sylvia, good morning. Thank you for joining us from Texas. Thank you for listening to Backchannel. If you want to watch it as well, you can do that on an Echo Show device. If you don't have one, you can buy one. Or you can just go to YouTube, of course, and just search my name and the word Backchannel. Okay, let's take a look at the Star Gazette next, which is from Elmira, New York. They lead with struggle every day Capitol officers endure. Yes, this is a very interesting story because I think yesterday another police officer sued Donald Trump. 10 of them now have sued Donald Trump for the insurrection, for the effect that it had on them. It says on January 6 last year, Sergeant Aquilino Gunnell stood in a tunnel near a basement entrance to the U.S. Capitol. A team of Capitol police officers that Gunnell supervised was assembled near the entrance where they vowed to hold the line. Gunnell looked at his watch, 1:13 p.m. Where is the help? He asked himself. He called on the radio for backup. It felt as if no one was responding to his distress call. By this time, thousands of people had traveled from in front of the White House to the west wing of the Capitol. Some walked straight up to officers and punched them to get through the bicycle rack barricades. A pipe bomb had been found at the Democratic National Committee headquarters. Police officers suffered some of the most brutal assaults of the day at the Lower West Terrace entrance, including an officer who screamed in pain as rioters crushed him in a doorway. I can't actually watch that footage. It's I've seen it a couple of times, and I just cannot look at it. I find it so completely horrifying, seeing that guy being crushed by that door. It's just terrifying. And they were loving it. The insurrectionists, they were loving it. Because, you have to ask yourself, how did the insurrectionists turn on everybody? Do you see what I mean? Like, who was the enemy? Because prior to that, you would have thought that patriotic / nationalist Trump supporters would be fans of the police, because there was actually lots of the police were also Trump supporters. A lot of them don't want to get vaccinated. We've discovered this. So if you are a supporter of the police, yet you don't believe that the election was fair, why crush a police officer in a doorway? Who's your enemy? The US Constitution? The vice president? I mean, he's on your team. He's a Republican. Were you against him? Because they were looking to hang Mike Pence. So this is what's so treasonous about this entire event, is that the Republicans, the insurrectionists, the Trump supporters, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, the QAnon people, all of these Confederalist flag wavers, they seemed to turn on America because America is the Metropolitan Police, the Capitol Police, the Vice President, the Speaker of the House. They turned on their own country. So I just can't get my head around who is the enemy. What were you seeking? And so that's why it's been referred to as a mob of angry rioters, because it seemed like there was just no logic to this. Who was the enemy that day? The only person I can see as the enemy is the US Constitution. And if your behavior as an American is unconstitutional, then that is treasonous. And this is why I don't understand why all of these people who have been charged, like 700 people now, they have been using this one, in addition to accusing them of public disorder and criminal damage and all of those things. There is this clause that they've been using when they're charging people, and they reckon this is the one that they could use against Donald Trump, is that it's almost a treasonous clause, that they're basically charging people with this additional clause that is for trying to prevent a constitutional act from taking place, i.e. stopping Mike Pence from certifying the election. And of the 700 people that have been arrested and charged, a good percentage of them have also been charged. I need to find out what the actual charge is called. There's a name for it. But they've also been charged with this new charge that has been, discovered as part of the, in part of constitutional law. And they reckon that Trump could be charged with this, as more evidence comes out now, that they could actually charge Trump with this. It's effectively a crime against America. Attackers sprayed through. Yes? Oh, yes, more on that later. We're gonna be discussing this later. But this police officer said that attackers sprayed through and jabbed whatever they could and find and tag teamed with one another to weaken the police line. It's a struggle every day, Ganell says. Every aspect of my life has been affected by the injuries I sustained that day. So every day is different, but yet the same for me, because I'm still living through the results of that horrific day. For a lot of people, it was just a day or 8 hours or however long January 6th lasted. For me, it has been ongoing. Do you know, the testimony of the Capitol Police officers, for me, was the most interesting and harrowing aspect of all of the analysis they've done since that event. Do you remember the guy that slammed his fist on the table? Do you remember the police officer when he was being, when he was giving evidence and he slammed his fist on the table because he was so angry? I found his testimony compelling. And yet there are still millions of people that think that what happened that day was necessary. Millions of people. I'm gonna remove my coat. I really hope you don't mind because it's getting a little bit warm in here, and I need to be comfortable. You know, gone are the days that I would suffer for the art. These days, I'm just like, I'm taking my coat off. My little what? Oh yeah, no, the foot fan it's not a little foot fan. It's an entire air conditioning system. But I don't want to turn it on because it's a bit cold outside. But at the same time, I just want to feel fresh. You know, I want to feel fresh. I don't want to feel, wrapped up in swaddling clothes like the baby Jesus. Here we go. Just adjusting my wires. I've got wires back there. Yes, I do actually own a turtleneck. I would love to wear it on this show sometime. I might redecorate the studio this afternoon so that tomorrow when you see this, it'll all be grey. I might do it after the show today. I'm very tired though, but I might do it anyway. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning for some reason, and I was just awake for the rest of the morning. Carla says it's the third day in a row that I've claimed I'm going to redecorate the studio. No, I'm definitely going to do it. I'm definitely going to do it. I mean, I could actually do it as part of this show, couldn't I? I could actually just do it during the show. You could just watch me take it all apart and glue the new ones on. I mean, it might even be more interesting than me talking about the American democracy for the 700th day in a row. Let's take a look at the... where are we going now? Oh, we're going to go to the New York Times next. New York Times on this... what day is it? Wednesday morning. Leads with... It's the 5th of January. I can't believe it. It always feels like... Well, how did that happen? We're already like well into 2022 already. Record surge in Americans leaving jobs. 4.5 million resigned, often to earn more. So it's a very good news story. On the front of the New York Times. Hospitals fill up, but fewer cases land in the ICU, which is very good news. You know, it's very important that we, specifically reference the difference between Omicron and Delta, and that is that there are fewer people in ICU. But please remember that it's the vaccination that is stopping people from going to hospital. You know, the people in hospital are still, in the majority, they are still unwell and unvaccinated. A year later, capital cases keep growing. Says by almost any measure, the criminal investigation of the January 6th attack on the Capitol is a prosecutorial effort of unparalleled complexity and scope. For an entire year, federal agents in almost every state have been poring over mounting stacks of tipster reports, interviews with witnesses, public social media posts, and private messages obtained by warrants. They've also collected nearly 14,000 hours of video from media outlets, surveillance cameras, and police-worn body cameras. Enough raw footage that it would take a year and a half of around-the-clock viewing to get through it. While the Justice Department has called the inquiry one of the largest in its history, traditional law enforcement officials have not been acting alone, working with information from online sleuths who style themselves as sedition hunters. The authorities have made more than 700 arrests with little sign of slowing down. The government estimates as many as 2,500 people who took part in the events of January 6 could be charged with federal crimes, and that includes more than 1,000 incidents that prosecutors believe could be assaults. As of this week, more than 225 people have been accused of attacking or interfering with the police that day. About 275 have been charged with what the government describes as the chief political crime on January 6. Oh, here we go. This is it. This is what I was talking about. The charge is obstructing Congress's duty to certify the 2020 presidential vote count. So that's the one that Trump could be charged with himself. A little over 300 people have been charged with petty crimes alone, mostly trespassing and disorderly conduct. So, this is it. Obstructing Congress's duty to certify the 2020 presidential vote count is in itself a chargeable crime. And it is one that I personally think is the most important because, if you have no democracy in a country like this, you have nothing. And here's the thing, and I think this is a very important point. Because conservatives and Republicans and Trump supporters have such a narrow view of the political landscape, it's their way or the highway. They don't understand that what Democrats and judges and the committee and everyone is fighting for is not for Democrats, it's for democracy. And I think this is a really important point, because Trump people just want to win at whatever cost, even if it means claiming an election is fraudulent, overthrowing a government or whatever. But what Democrats are trying to do, not just Democrats, but anybody, there's Adam Kinzinger and there's Dick Cheney's daughter. She'll forever be called Dick Cheney's daughter. Liz Cheney. They're trying to reestablish democracy so that Republicans can win in the future. This is not about rigging it so that conservatives don't win. This is about fixing it so that the playing field is even. This is about allowing people to have a free democratic vote. And this is where the name, for me, comes in as an issue, because democracy and Democrats is such a similar word that I personally believe that Republicans think that Democrats are trying to fix democracy so that they can win. And I know that sounds simplistic, and I know it sounds like a childish argument, but trust me, I have spoken to so many people. They think that democracy is exclusive to Democrats. And this is where we're at now. We have a society that has taken its democracy for granted for so many years. And despite democracies around the world falling, some of which the American military are responsible for, and yet there was no concept of American democracy falling. Nobody considered that until an autocrat showed up, lost the election, claimed he won, continues to claim he has won, and yet has not been arrested. It's like, if it was any of those other countries where the loser claims they won and tried to, was basically convincing 70 million voters, 74 million voters, that the election was won by the other side unfairly and illegitimately, that in itself should be a crime. And yet, for some reason in America, it isn't. And I think it's because we have this hierarchy here where we think of people, invariably men, in a suit, an ill-fitting suit, often with a red tie that's too long. But a white man in a suit should be trusted. Whereas a progressive Democrat who might be Puerto Rican or Muslim and female is not to be trusted. And that really is the modern America that we're dealing with. And I believe that, this is part of the problem, isn't it? This is why I don't think that Trump will ever be prosecuted, because he is a rich white male in a suit. And that's what he does. And that's what he's always done. He's always paid people off, sued people, got away with it. Stormy Daniels, never heard of her. So, this is a bigger problem than the one that we thought we had. Please don't be distracted by the visual of the insurrection, because that was just 2,500 people having a bad day. For me, the bigger crime is what's happening in these state legislatures up and down the country. The gerrymandering, the redrawing of boundary lines. Republicans know they can't win. Well, that's not true. Republicans know they won't win. They can win, of course they can, if they were to have some policies and to actually, offer something that's worth voting for. But currently, they won't win. So they're rigging it so that they can. And that is my concern, is that it's happening by stealth because people don't really care for the state legislatures. I mean, prior to the 2020 election, most people didn't even realize what they were, Brad Raffensperger was like an item on a menu at Umami Burger. Now he's the guy that Trump begged effectively to find 7,000 more votes. I mean, even that recorded phone call, I listened to it in full on YouTube recently, where he's begging the Georgia legislature to find him 7,000 more votes because he thinks he deserved to win. He lost. The treason is on tape. And I wouldn't mind if it was a secret phone call where Trump's like ringing someone on the quiet on his like personal cell phone. It was on a recorded line from the White House with Mark Meadows listening in. And Brad had a couple of people listening in, and everybody was like talking together, and it was like, this is how the guy conducted business. So, the evidence is clear. The data can't be argued with. The distraction of the visual of the guy being crushed or Ashley Babbitt being shot or any of these events that happened, as tragic as they were, these people didn't go to the Capitol and try and take back their country, to coin a phrase, on their own will. They did it because they read about it on Facebook. They did it because Donald Trump has been pushing this lie about election fraud for months, if not over a year before the insurrection. And, in interviews, a lot of these insurrectionists said, we did it because our president told us to. They've actually used those words. They were carrying Trump flags, for goodness sake. And so, they were put up to it because a lot of them aren't, and with respect, weren't smart enough to go about this on their own. And this is where, for me, my concern and the reason that the Republican Party won't win is because it has embraced the far right. Nationalism has given way, or patriotism has given way to nationalism. Nationalism has given way to Nazism. And so all of these fringe groups, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, the fringe groups that before you'd kind of ignore them. If you were a fiscal conservative or a regular Republican or even Mitch McConnell, you would ignore those groups because, okay, yeah, they might support you in a roundabout way, but we don't really want to talk about them or include them. Trump included everybody. The guy wanted these fringe groups on his team because he wanted to win at whatever cost. And he would say anything to get votes. Stand by and stand aside. Find people on both sides. All of these things, including this little white power symbol. He might not have even known he was doing it. But there's a huge number of people out there that see that as a call to arms. In the same way that, Trump kept denying that he was in, cahoots with Russia. He didn't even know. They've been working on him for years. Of course he was an operative, but he had no idea because he doesn't have an intellect. So he just is a populist. He desperately wants to be popular. He never had any policies apart from deregulating and shutting things down. The way that you communicate with the world and do business with the world, trade with the world and share with the world is to actually come up with some really interesting policies like the Paris Climate Accord. The kind of stuff that brings the world together. No, he left the Paris Climate Accord. He left the Iran nuclear deal and he just, quit anything and everything that was part of this kind of world order that kept the world from attacking each other. Iran now is enriching uranium like it's going out of fashion. Putin is about to go to war with Ukraine. It was all because of Trump stuff. If you look at the history behind this, we did it on the show the other day. We looked at the timeline leading up to what is effectively the potential for a war now, which of course Biden will end up taking the blame for. We're living in this kind of weird dystopian universe, like it's never been this bad. But the disruptor was Trump. But because before Trump, the conservatives, the Republican Party, I hated George W. Bush. I hated him. In hindsight, the guy looks like a reasonably decent fellow. I hated him because of his decision to go to war with Afghanistan and Iraq. I hated him for that reason. But that was back in the late 90s. But here we are now in this world where the Republican Party is unrecognizable from the party of George Bush, and certainly George Bush Sr. It has become a far-right extremist party. The fact that you have Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and these types of people within the party, they're not even like advisors on the outside, like Steve Bannon was. These people are actually congresswomen. And both of them loved the January 6th insurrection. They thought it was brilliant because they were partly to blame. They were helpful in organizing it. Lauren Boebert, it's reported, took some people on a tour the day before, showing them, well, where is a nice place to break in. This is where the chamber is. This is where Pelosi's office is. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, who got banned from Twitter 2 days ago, her timeline is like a historical diary of planning for an insurrection. The misinformation, which is a lovely word for lies, isn't it? Do you remember when Trump was first in and the media had no idea how to report on him and they referred to everything as, did they say what was the word they used? Was it untruths? They had a word instead of lying. Because it's inappropriate to refer to somebody as a liar, and it's frowned upon, and you can be sued. You can be sued if you say someone lies, and they can claim they didn't lie. Was it untruths? The media had a terrible word for this, and it really frustrated me because it's like you just got to say the guy's lying because he's lying. I think a mistruth is if you don't know that the information is wrong, but he knew. So it was malicious, like he actually knew what he was doing. Anyway, this is just my feeling and my view, because I love America and I live in America and I care about America, but really the reason I moved here is because it was the free West. A free vote, free speech, not hate speech. And the difference, unfortunately, has become so blurred. In England, where I'm from, you do hate speech on the radio, of course, but on Twitter even, and it's illegal. It's just illegal. You get done, get arrested. But there's something about freedom in America where hate speech seems to be acceptable. And is that because nobody is prepared to draw a line and say, okay, that's the line at which we don't cross? In England, there's a line. There are certain words you don't say after certain times on television. It's like there's an understanding of like what you can and you can't get away with. But hate speech is not one of them. You don't refer to Ilhan Omar as a suicide bomber because she has a backpack. Even in a joke. It's just racism. And, I think all of this comes down to economics, people getting poorer, and yet the people who are the poorest invariably are voting for the party that has absolutely no plans to make them rich. That's the thing I've never understood. It's like if you are dispossessed, if you are out of work, if you're living in one of these towns, in Alabama or somewhere, that is, or Indiana, that is just on its knees, the Democrats are more likely to find you a job. Republicans are not doing anything for the poor. They talk about the middle classes all the time, never mention the poor. I was listening to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez the other day, and she was making a speech in Congress, and she referenced the poor constantly. And I was like, wow, I just don't hear this in America. It's almost like if you ignore the poor, it'll go away. It's what Trump did with coronavirus. Close your eyes, and it'll be gone. It's like a miracle. In 3 or 4 days, it'll be gone. This is this dystopian world we seem to be living in right now, where the Trump world is a narrative all of its own. But the other world shouldn't be considered democratic, or the Democrats. It should be considered reality. His is a kind of hell fantasy, and everybody else should be in reality. I mean, I don't get a vote in this country. I'm a migrant. I don't get to vote, so I'm not a voter. I mean, I know who I'd probably vote for, but I don't get to vote. But I do want to live in a country that still has a free vote, that has a vote that gets counted, a vote that is of value. And that's what we're fighting for. So for me, the insurrection is a nice distraction and a tragedy, of course. 5 people died. Police officers committed suicide. I mean, it was a disaster of a day. But that was just one moment. It had been building for years, and it hasn't stopped. For me, the trajectory is still going. The whole movement of election fraud and Trump denying Joe Biden's legitimate win, and the state legislatures now, who are Trump people now, are being placed there. These are not just Republicans. These are people who genuinely believe that the election was stolen, and they're going to make sure it never happens again. Yeah. They're going to make sure that the count goes red. That's their job. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. Should we do the US news update now? Because I think it's about time. It's 10 o'clock on the nose. It's the 5th of January, a day before the anniversary of the arguably darkest day in American political history. And I'm sure tomorrow there's going to be a whole lot more to talk about. But today we are just reflecting on how we felt 24 hours before it happened. They were about to certify Joe Biden's win. Next thing you know, it's hang Mike Pence. Fascinating. Okay, here's the US News Update. It's a daily podcast that I do. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll be back in 2 minutes. It's Wednesday, January 5. From the Volley Network, this is your daily US News Update. I'm Anthony Davis. Former US President Donald Trump on Tuesday cancelled a news conference he had scheduled for January 6, the one-year anniversary of his supporters' deadly attack on the US Capitol. Trump said in a statement he would instead discuss many of the same topics he would have addressed at the news conference at a rally in Arizona on January 15. Thousands of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol on January 6 last year in the worst assault on Congress since the War of 1812. Fueled by Trump's false claims that his November 2020 election defeat was the result of fraud, the rioters tried to stop Congress from certifying Joe Biden's victory. One police officer who responded to the scene died the day after the attack, while 4 others who guarded the Capitol died later by suicide. About 140 officers were injured during the hours-long attack. 4 rioters also died. More than 700 people have been charged with joining in the assault. The violence led to Trump's second impeachment and numerous investigations. One of them in the House of Representatives is seeking to question influential Fox News television personality Sean Hannity about is seeking to question influential Fox News television personality Sean Hannity about text messages with Trump, his aides, and his lawyers during that time. The number of Americans voluntarily quitting their jobs surged to a record 4.5 million in November, a show of confidence in the labor market and an indication that higher wages could prevail for a while. All 4 US regions reported a rise in the number of people quitting their jobs. Your daily US news update is part of the Volley network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo device to open Backchannel. There it is. The US News Update. It's a daily podcast. You can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. Dave has just joined us from Illinois. Hello to Ozzy in Washington, D.C. Stacy has to go and see Tracy and get a bath. So what a lineup we have. Thank you for spending your morning with us here on Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis, and we are going to have a little chat in a little while with your pal Hal, who's on next. It'll be the first time that he and I have met. And I'm kind of excited because I'm a bit of a fanboy and I am a little anxious. You know, I suffer from mild anxiety, and I fear that, you know, it's going to come to the fore when that happens. Oh, hello to Skill Killer the Rapper in Oregon. Thank you for joining us as well. Nice to know that you're listening again. You've been with us the last few days, which is very sweet. Appreciate that. Okay, next we're going to take a look at the Los Angeles Times, which is where I am here in LA. Vaccine divide in US military. It says, Nicolaya Sampson seemed well on her way to achieving her dream of becoming an officer in the US Army. A stellar student whose family had a long tradition of military service, the San Antonio native, and a coveted spot at West Point. She completed her freshman year in the spring of 2021, just as the military launched its vaccination campaign against COVID-19. Though she had no problem with the 9 other vaccines the US military requires upon enlisting, she said she was worried that the COVID-19 shots were too new for their risk to be fully understood. She said her parents, both Army veterans, told her she had only one option: get out as quickly as you can. So in October, she quit West Point. This is the same issue that my Republican landlord has. Just doesn't trust the mRNA vaccine. The latest data from the military show that roughly 30,000 active duty service members remain unvaccinated against COVID-19, despite a Defense Department mandate issued in August and deadlines that have passed. Their defiance of a military order is a striking illustration of how deeply politicized the pandemic has become in the United States. Racism, suicide, addiction to conspiracy theories, you name it. You can find it in the civilian population, you can find it in the military, said Peter Fever, a political scientist at Duke University who specializes in civil-military relations. The difference is that the military has a wider range of tools to include more day-to-day control over the lives of their people. Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting, isn't it, that the vaccine, it's like, where do you get your information from? You know, if you get your information from regular sources, the right call it the mainstream media, which they believe is corrupted, then you'll take your vaccine. But if you get your information from Facebook, which is where a lot of this misinformation is born, then you're not going to take the vaccine because you're going to be told that the mainstream media is lying to you. And this is the argument I have with my landlord. He thinks that I am lying because I'm in the mainstream media. And because he knows that I work for the BBC, he thinks the BBC is biased because his friend told him that, get this, Bill Gates pays for the BBC. This is what he said to me yesterday. He said, Bill Gates pays for the BBC, and therefore you're drinking the Kool-Aid, you're biased. And I was like, wow, this guy really is like, he just doesn't understand. I mean, just doesn't understand, and yet they don't care to understand. These people don't want to do any research. They don't want to discuss. They don't want to analyze. They don't want to have a conversation that lasts more than 3 seconds. They just want to accuse. Based on what? On misinformation. But they don't think it's misinformation. When I say to them, that's not true, they presume that my information is not true. And the untruth that I am accessing is as untrue as the untruth that they might be accessing. To them, it's like, this is exclusive to America. This has been happening since the 1980s, when the fairness doctrine was disbanded and the, people had to start, people started watching biased news coverage that didn't have to be balanced anymore. Blame Ronald Reagan and Donald Rumsfeld. They were the people behind this. And some people say that the reason they did it is because they wanted to sow misinformation. They wanted propaganda to be part of the news. They weren't deregulating just for the sake of it. It's very interesting to me, this whole idea that a country can be so misinformed and uneducated through no fault of its own. I don't blame my landlord. I blame the system that he has bought into. And it's mainstream. I mean, there's a whole campaign at the moment to stop cable carriers from carrying Fox News and Newsmax and AON and One America and all of these news channels, news in inverted commas. There's campaigns now, because these channels are free and they are part of, well, they say free, you pay for cable and they're included. And so what campaigners are trying to do is have them made a pay option. They don't want it to be included as part of the basic package. They don't think that people should be exposed to this information as part of the basic package. And I can understand that. Also, yes. Yeah, no, I appreciate that it happens all over the world, but I just don't know. I always felt that it was more fringe in other countries, certainly in England. It was more fringe. It all changed with Brexit, of course. Nigel Farage in England, where the whole kind of concept of, take back control, which turned out to be a lie. I think that was the point in England where it became so divisive. And Boris Johnson's tenure, of course, because, even conservatives realize that the guy's a clown. But in America, this has been going on for 30 years. And it started on the radio. It started on conservative talk stations, on the medium wave, on AM. And there's a very good documentary which I can recommend. And it's called The Brainwashing of My Father. And it was made by a filmmaker whose dad got a new job about 20 years ago. He was a very progressive guy, Democrat, and he got a new job he was a salesman, so he was on the road and he had to do this long drive all the time. Might be called The Brainwashing of My Dad. I don't think they'd say father. The Brainwashing of My Dad. And his daughter made a documentary about how her father changed politically because of this long drive that he did to and from work. Because he would listen to Rush Limbaugh and all of these right-wing radio hosts doing talk radio on his long drive. And it made him, by the time he'd, retired, it had turned him from being a very, progressive, inclusive, cosmopolitan individual into being an extreme, racist, xenophobe, hard right conservative who hated anybody that wasn't white. The Brainwashing of My Dad. It's a really interesting documentary. And this is something that has happened all over America, is that where people have been brainwashed into thinking that their country is changing and, the lost traditions of America. I mean, it will happen I believe it will happen. I believe it will happen everywhere. but I think that America had a bit of a head start by nature of its scale and by nature of its, media. Because the media is everything here. We don't have panel shows in America. Carla, are you aware of this? These like satirical panel shows like that we have in England, like Have I Got News for You, or even, 8 out of 10 Cats, or any of these things where this is like a satirical panel show where you have to be highly intelligent to go on the show, because that's why the show is so funny, because the level of intellect is magnificent. They don't have shows like that in America. And what those shows are so good at is poking fun at our reality and reminding us of who we are and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And yeah, but they're not. The Daily Show is one show watched by Democrats. It's like, it's not for everybody. The thing about 8 out of 10 Cats or QI or any of these types of shows. I mean, we also have we also have quiz shows in England that have no prize. And that would be considered an impossibility for Americans to conceptualize going on a game show where there was no prize. Just the fun of doing it. I'm fascinated by all of this. I really feel like there is this huge cultural difference, and I'm learning about it because I love this country more than I love my own country, I'll be honest. I'm done with my own country. Someone said to me the other day, when are you going back to England just to visit? I'm like, no, I'm not going back to England. I just don't have a reason to go back right now. I see my friends on FaceTime, the ones that want to come visit me here. Carla, could you recommend a reason for me to come back to England any time? I mean, what am I missing? What's going on there right now? No. Omicron? Gas prices? I mean, yeah, I don't ride the subway anymore because I get a bit scared. But I honestly feel since the 7th of January 2005, I genuinely have rarely ridden the tube since. I found that whole thing too traumatizing. I didn't hear that. No, that's very interesting. It's 10:15. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. Let's continue our coverage of the newspapers. The Merced Sun Star, Merced's new San Jose Sharks youth hockey rink on track for March despite some criticism. Okay. Homeowners being forced out by Yosemite are seeking help. We don't know what to do. I remember when my sister was talking to me about Yosemite, and we were talking about the Apple operating system that was called Yosemite, but she'd never seen the word before, and she kept saying to me, Yosemite, it's Yosemite, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about? Yosemite. Anyway, this story is very interesting. It says one Yosemite area homeowner recently mailed a handwritten letter stained with tears to the Yosemite National Park, asking for more time to leave her longtime home. She hasn't yet received a response. Imagine losing your home after 40 years, said the woman's son, Luke Harbin, for a Fresno Bee story that published this weekend about residents of the El Portal Trailer Park near Yosemite being told for the first time, the week before Christmas, that they have to remove or surrender their homes in early 2022. The National Park Service has other plans for the site and is concerned about power lines there. Many people who learned of their plight have expressed interest in helping the residents, but those affected are still working out what to do next. Several homeowners said they're looking to hire an attorney to help them, but haven't found one yet. I mean, people got to live somewhere, you know? And these people are some of the poorest people in the country. And this is their home. This is what they know. And the problem is, invariably, the people that sit in offices who make the laws, bylaws, and laws about, national parks, they have nicer homes. So to them, they don't consider the fact that living in a trailer park, oh, that's fine, it's just a trailer park. It's not just a trailer park. It's their home. Um, if you want to have your say on this or anything that we're discussing, then you can just wake up your device, say your magic word, whatever that is, your wake up word, followed by say, and then your message. You can also message me via backchannel.tv, where you can also leave a review. The San Francisco Chronicle this morning: water use limits now mandatory. Violations of new state regulations could bring fines, they say. Yes, Californians must curb their outdoor water use under statewide regulations adopted on Tuesday as a stubborn drought continues to threaten water supplies despite recent storms. The State Water Resources Control Board voted to enact year-long prohibitions on water uses considered wasteful, such as cleaning sidewalks or public medians with drinkable water, washing cars without an automatic shut-off nozzle, and irrigating ornamental landscapes within 48 hours of measurable rain. Violations could result in a $500 a day fine. Holiday infections shatter records. Hospitalizations, deaths far below last year's highs. California reported an enormous spike in coronavirus cases over the holiday weekend, far surpassing the peak of last winter's surge. And doctors' quest to link shipyard to illnesses. Hunters Point deemed safe, but activist raises alarms. This is very interesting. Hunters Point Naval Shipyard, the key to the investigation into the lives and deaths of people like her dad, George Donald Porter. This is Ashima Porter, who's a physician, but she's become more of a detective in this story. She uses brightly coloured pins to map other potentially hazardous chemicals that she detects in people who live and work near the shipyard. Yellow for uranium, green for cesium, and white for strontium, and so on. A second map charts illnesses reported by some of her volunteers, from breast cancer to lung disease to brain tumours. Yeah, she is a modern-day Erin Brockovich. Interesting. And look, it reminds me a little bit of the Flint water crisis. The lead that's in the Flint water system that's been poisoning children, and the government, did nothing about. Michael Moore made a documentary about it. He is from Flint, Michigan himself, so he knows firsthand how much of a problem this is. And also, a state probe says that PG&E caused the Dixie Fire. Wow. Yes, the second largest wildfire in recorded California history was sparked by PG&E power lines that came into contact with a tree, California fire officials said on Tuesday. The Dixie Fire started on July 13 west of the Crested Dam in Butte County. It scorched 963,000 acres and destroyed over 1,300 structures in Butte, Plumas, Lassen, Shasta, and Tehama counties. CAL FIRE said it sent its investigative report to the Butte County District Attorney's Office. I mean, these companies like PG&E, we have the same here with the Department of Water and Power, they make so much profit. They make a fortune. And the infrastructure is shot. I mean, think of the number of jobs that could be created if you had a task force that were just going around and they were rewiring or fixing telegraph poles, switching out the old wooden poles for these new metal poles that they've used. They've done it here up on Mulholland. And a woman drove into one of these poles and it took out power to my area and the surrounding area. For 6 days, we had no power. 6 days. No compensation, no mention of anything. Just 6 days with no power. Not even a discount on the bill. So they replaced those telegraph poles with metal poles that will not be knocked over in a storm or by a woman in a car. PG&E need to be going around replacing all of their infrastructure because they caused the second biggest fire in history. It's just nuts, isn't it? Should we talk a little bit? About Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy? Should we do that one next? Do you think that's worth doing? Which newspaper was this? Let's have a look. Oh, right at the bottom. The Durango Herald. I love it. Is this the story about the first female mayor who turned 90? It's very cute. Celebrating her 90th birthday on New Year's Day, Durango's first female mayor, Maxine Peterson, has seen the city change from a small mountain town to a renowned destination for outdoor recreation. I think just about everything in Durango has changed so much, she said. It's a very likable place, and obviously people like to come here. She moved to Durango with her husband, Carol Pete Peterson. I love the fact that his name is Carol. There was a very popular name in the 60s to call a man Carol. In 1968, when he accepted a job teaching at Fort Lewis College, Peterson and her husband fell in love with the natural beauty of the area. My husband always wanted to say that he had the best job in the most beautiful spot in the world, and I'd tell him, you can't beat that. They raised 4 children in Durango and started in a small home in Animas Heights. But this is the thing about, there's several ways to live your life. I was watching an interview with Fran. Is her name Fran Lieberman, the wonderful New Yorker? I was watching an extended interview on YouTube with her from MSNBC. She gave a long interview, and she talked about growing up in Jersey and how complex that was, and how tragic that was, and how poor they were, and it was difficult in Jersey growing up in the 1950s and 60s. But she always had New York. She always had Manhattan. She could always get on the ferry or go across was there a bridge in those days? I don't know. But she could always go to New York occasionally and see another way of living. And this is the thing I think about when you grow up in a certain town, maybe a small town in the case of Maxine Peterson and Durango. Like, if you don't have other distractions, then it can be your paradise. It's the same as living on a trailer park. If you aren't exposed to another way of life, it's your Elysium. And for me, like, I grew up in London, which was already an international city. So I grew up seeing what this kind of international lifestyle was like. And hence why I craved more, which is why I moved to California. But fundamentally, if you grow up in a small town, a little place, a cute village, and your ambitions don't really head beyond that, then you can have everything you want there. You've got it all. So, Maxine Peterson turned 90 on New Year's Day. Lovely. Okay, let's go to this story about Kevin McCarthy, because in the hours after the attack on the Capitol, Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy seemed united as they spoke on the House floor. The Democratic and Republican lawmakers vowed to defy the insurrectionist mob's attempts to block certification of the presidential election results. The Californians hinted that the trauma of the day would help bridge the partisan divide in Congress. They even agreed that President Trump, through action or inaction, bore significant responsibility for the Capitol riot. You see, they actually said it out loud. McCarthy said it out loud. But of course, McCarthy now, after talking to Trump, has changed his story. A chasm has grown between the two leaders over how to move forward from the attack and how to hold those responsible accountable. It's a divide that reflects a larger split in America as more people inside and outside of Washington seek to write and rewrite history. Through a second impeachment and the House Select Committee investigation, Nancy Pelosi has focused on Trump, his allies, and those who attempted to overturn the election results. Kevin McCarthy, meanwhile, has sought to block the Democratic-led investigations and increasingly backed away from his early criticism of the former president, looking instead to shift the blame and connect the attack to broader civil unrest in the country. As the congressional investigation searches for answers about why the January 6th attack happened, most Republican lawmakers dismiss it as a partisan effort to reopen political wounds and smear their party. I mean, this is the thing I find so interesting, is that there doesn't even need to be an investigation, really. Like, if everybody was living in the same reality and not just, like, floating off into this parallel universe, it's blatantly obvious because everything was filmed. Why does there have to be an investigation? Trump got up and said week after week, month after month, that the election was going to be rigged. He then gets up on the morning, makes a speech that says, let's go take back our country. And if Mike Pence certifies the election, then he's a bad person because it's a fraudulent election and we won. Frankly, he said, frankly, we won the election. Those were his words. Frankly. And, you know, every single investigation into election fraud has come up with nothing. Even the Supreme Court, packed with conservatives, has refused to take on this case because there's nothing. I mean, there wasn't even anything. I mean, I wouldn't mind if there was like, there turned out there was like 10% of it turned out to be fraud, but it still wasn't enough to turn it. There was no fraud. There was 475 votes that were a little bit, you know, gone astray. And they weren't Democrat votes. It says, I mean, and interestingly, you know, when they've recounted in some districts, they've actually realized that Joe Biden won even more votes than they thought. Trump lost even more than he did. Underlying it all is the lie that the former president and his allies first began seeding in the months leading up to his loss, that the election was illegitimate. And so, you know, the Save America rally at the Ellipse outside the White House near the Washington Monument, he told his supporters he would join them in walking to the Capitol. His words were, and I quote, "And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who've been lawfully slated. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard." That's what Trump said. McCarthy, initially, after it happened, "I condemn any of this. This is appalling. This is un-American. This should never happen in our nation. And whatever is going on right now needs to stop. They broke windows. They overran the building. We had to stop our proceedings in the middle of it. As a nation, I know we sit back and we're appalled by what we're seeing, but I want everyone to take a deep breath and understand that we all have some responsibility here." Since the formation of the House Select Committee to investigate January 6 by Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy has attempted to undermine the work of the panel. According to the former South Carolina state representative and civil rights lawyer Bakari Sellers, Pelosi has proved to be better than McCarthy regarding the messaging that is put out by the committee. Sellers explained how McCarthy has now placed himself in a bad position when the House Republican leader decided to boycott the bipartisan panel investigating the insurrection. They said that Republicans felt McCarthy's decision was unwise. I mean, of course it was unwise, because you're distancing yourself from something that's on video. It's a bit like Derek Chauvin, right? Trying to plead innocence when he murdered George Floyd. It's on video, mate. And this is really the insanity of the modern day, that everything is filmed, whether it's a bystander video in the case of George Floyd, or whether it's people. I mean, a lot of the video that was used in the insurrection was actually put on social media by insurrectionists. There's their own videos that have been used to convict them. McCarthy is now denying an event that was filmed. Trump is denying an event that was filmed. He'll claim that he never told them to go to the Capitol and take back their country, and yet it was filmed, and he will still deny it. He'll be like, no, I never said that. It's fascinating to me that even evidence that is as clear as day in the minds of people living in this fantasy world, none of it is true. I mean, Trump was claiming that it was Antifa, which are an organization that he has invented. Because I am Antifa. And hopefully you are Antifa. Carla is Antifa. I mean, it should be pronounced Antifa, right? Because it's anti-fascist. And the problem is, the moment you say Antifa, which is invented by Trump, it sounds like a Muslim group, which is what he wants, because he wants people to think of it as an enemy, a brown-skinned enemy. This is all part of the racist undertones. And he qualified Antifa, a terrorist organization, and put it on the wanted list to be anti-fascist. And the reason that he did this is because he is the fascist. So anybody that is against him is an anti-fascist, is Antifa. So he claimed that Antifa, whoever they are, don't exist, was people against Trump, dressed up as Trump supporters, wrapping themselves in Confederate flags, and attacking the Capitol. He said it. And who's supposed to believe that? The problem is, he has a cult-like following. So the people that are listening to him, they believe it. And the problem is that, Facebook is now at the heart of all of this and is in denial also. Scores of Facebook posts from the days before and after the January 6th Capitol riots in Washington are now missing. The posts disappeared from CrowdTangle, a tool owned by Facebook that allows researchers to track what people are saying on the platform, according to academics from New York University. The lost posts, everything from innocuous personal updates to potential incitement to violence to mainstream news articles, have been unavailable within Facebook's transparency system since at least May 2021. The company said they were accidentally removed from CrowdTangle because of a limit on how Facebook allows data to be accessed via its technical transparency tools. It says the error has now been fixed. They haven't addressed the sizable gap in its CrowdTangle data publicly, despite ongoing pressure from policymakers about the company's role in helping spread messages, posts, and videos about the violent insurrection which killed 5 people. It's still unclear how many posts are missing from CrowdTangle, when they'll be restored, and if the problem solely affects US content or material from all of Facebook's 2.4 billion users worldwide. The academics who discovered the problem estimate that tens of thousands of Facebook posts are currently missing. And the failure to disclose the lost posts, which are due to a technical error, supposedly, come at a difficult time for Facebook and its efforts to promote transparency around what people see within its network. I mean, the problem, you see, I don't like Facebook and I've never had a Facebook account. But I also recognize that Facebook should be a free platform. And I do think that, to be able to communicate with people via a site like Facebook is essential. I did some research yesterday on the new conservative apps that are cropping up. Because, of Trump and Marjorie and everyone being banned from Twitter. So, they've set up their own now. There's one called Gab. And I took a look at that. And the other one is called Getter or something like that. Maybe it's Getter. Anyway, they're just terrible. I mean, technically they don't really work. I looked at the reviews on the iTunes store of what people were saying about them, and they're like, I just get a black screen. I can't log in. I can't do this. I can't do that. Like, the technology behind Twitter and Facebook, like the investment, the cost of the infrastructure to build something so seamless is huge. But, the kind of few conservatives and Donald Trump and some, millionaire friends behind these new conservative apps, they are not investing enough. I mean, maybe they'll get fixed. Yeah, that's it. Getter. Yeah. The name is terrible. Yeah. And the other one's called Gab, I think. But this is where a lot of this conversation is happening now. So Facebook, I do personally think has to take responsibility for hosting misinformation. I think that's what this is about. It's about hosting misinformation. And Facebook is definitely responsible. And the fact that thousands of posts around the January 6 riots have gone missing, I don't think is a technical error. I think that was a legitimate decision. And I actually don't see Mark Zuckerberg as a goodie in all this. I see him as a conservative, and I see him as somebody who ultimately and fundamentally wants to cause chaos. But he doesn't see himself as a baddie. It's a bit like Steve Bannon. This is somebody has so much self-belief that they don't even care what they look like. That's the thing about Bannon. He doesn't even care whether he shaves or whether he wears a shirt on top of a shirt on top of a jacket. Like, the guy is just ridiculous. He literally looks like he's just climbed out of a dumpster, and yet the guy is a multi-millionaire operator. Should we chat with Hal now? Is it time to jump on there? It's 10:40. We're going to talk with Hal Rudnick, who's your pal Hal, and he does the show immediately after this show. Oh, okay. Can you hurry up, please, Hal? We're ready for you. It's 10:40. Did you arrange a 10:40 meeting? Okay. Okay. We're going to play the Volley News Update. This is our little podcast. It's a 2-minute podcast all about the news. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Here it is. It's Wednesday, January 5. From the Volley Network, this is your daily US News Update. I'm Anthony Davis. Former US President Donald Trump on Tuesday cancelled a news conference he had scheduled for January 6, the one-year anniversary of his supporters' deadly attack on the US Capitol. Trump said in a statement he would instead discuss many of the same topics he would have addressed at the news conference at a rally in Arizona on January 15. Thousands of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol on January 6 last year in the worst assault on Congress since the War of 1812. Fueled by Trump's false claims that his November 2020 election defeat was the result of fraud, the rioters tried to stop Congress from certifying Joe Biden's victory. One police officer who responded to the scene died the day after the attack, while 4 others who guarded the Capitol died later by suicide. About 140 officers were injured during the hours-long attack. 4 rioters also died. More than 700 people have been charged with joining in the assault. The violence led to Trump's second impeachment and numerous investigations. One of them, in the House of Representatives, is seeking to question influential Fox News television personality Sean Hannity about text messages with Trump, his aides, and his lawyers during that time. The number of Americans voluntarily quitting their jobs surged to a record 4.5 million in November, a show of confidence in the labor market and an indication that higher wages could prevail for a while. All 4 US regions reported a rise in the number of people quitting their jobs. Your daily US news update is part of the Volley Network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo device to open Backchannel. There is the US news update. That's how it sounds. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Anthony Davis. This is Backchannel on this Wednesday morning. It's the 5th of January, 2022. We've been looking at the US Capitol being attacked by the mob of Trump supporters and talking about the effects of that a year on, and also my view that really that day was, as harrowing as that was, the problem that we have now is that US democracy is being undermined by stealth. So it's actually happening through gerrymandering at the state legislature level, and that is the reason why we will see the election stolen again, or for the first time, because of course they didn't get away with it this time, but next time they might. Should we have a quick look at the border story, or would we have our friend now? Okay, great. If you're ready, Hal, give us a wave. That's what producer Carla has asked, and then I'll move aside. Which side shall I go to? I guess I'll go over here. Ah, there he is.
Oh, my goodness.
Let me move over here so I can get in the middle of the frame,
Anthony Davis, what a pleasure.
Hal, what a pleasure. Your mum and I are very thrilled to know that you are part of this operation. Deborah and I have become very close in recent days.
I know. I'm so thrilled that my mom enjoys the Anthony Davis show. And thank you for just filling her time with entertainment, information. Anthony, I really appreciate you, pal.
Thank you. Are you in California as well? Are we nearby?
I am. I'm in Los Angeles. And you too? You're in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I'm in West Hollywood, yeah.
Hey, neighbor.
Where are you?
My wife and I live in West Hollywood.
This is wonderful. We're going to have drinks or something.
Absolutely. I think it calls for it. And then we'll have a special show where I'll creep right into your booth and wave, and then we can you know what? We should build a studio right here in West Hollywood.
Yeah, it should be the kind of the Backchannel. Well, no, don't say that, because then we'll have to leave the house, and I don't think that's
true.
Is something I'm really up for. I've spent the last couple of years in this box, and I've kind of come to enjoy it. It's like this is where I want to spend the rest of my dying days.
Yes, this is my safe haven, the new normal in my own little bubble. But Anthony, what if we could build like a Backchannel fortress where we could fortify ourselves in case of like a zombie apocalypse or a COVID apocalypse, God forbid. It'll be like a bunker.
Well, I'm kind of already in that. I mean, I have various things in case I get locked in here. So I have like a little portable toilet, and I have a big. I'm not even kidding. I can show it to you if you really want to see it. But this really is like. I've always been like this. I've always been the kind of person that had like a nuclear holocaust safety cupboard in the kitchen, where there was like tins of food, and and even when I lived in London, which is not an earthquake city, there was always like, just in case stuff, and people would ridicule me for this, but it's a natural anxiety, I'm ready. I'm ready just for when it happens. I'm ready.
The past couple of years have proven you to be the smart one. All the doubters.
Yeah.
So all the prepping, would you first off, would you classify yourself as a prepper?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think when I took that personality test, it said I was a protagonist and a strategist.
Okay, and you need that, especially now. The events of the past couple of years. We're coming up tomorrow on a terrible anniversary, January 6th, and with COVID and everything. Anthony, as a prepper, this is your time to shine.
I know. I've had like 7 vaccines now. I'm so over prepared.
Right. I've had 2. I got the Johnson & Johnson first.
Oh, well.
And then I got a Pfizer booster.
Yeah, that's what you have to do.
What were you going to ask?
Well, I was going to ask you like how it feels as an American, because obviously I'm a illegal immigrants, so it's different for me. But how do you feel about having like, because the world is in a pretty crazy place, and
Indeed.
and obviously it's not America's fault that there's a pandemic, and it's not anyone's fault that there's a pandemic, apart from a
Hmm.
solitary bat in a wet market in Wuhan. But it is certainly the fault of America that the country is now in this, you know, devastating, undemocratic space where there's this division, political division. And,
Hmm.
and I've said on this show today and the last few days that January 6th shouldn't be looked upon as the issue going forward, because that was like a very visually distracting day, because to see people like jumping on your Capitol building was, and breaking in and putting their feet on Pelosi's desk and sitting in the chamber and all that stuff it's very visually stimulating. But it's not actually the thing that is causing the concern and the upset for future elections. That is more at the state legislature level, and the
Hmm.
gerrymandering and the boundary line redrawing and all of the
Hmm.
things that are effectively going to prevent America from having a free vote like they did so how do you feel about your democracy being compromised?
Terrible. Anthony, this country's going to hell in a handbasket, and you're absolutely right with the gerrymandering and so many of the laws, and putting people who believe the election lie into power and putting their hands on the levers and gears of power. So in the future, if they don't like the result of an election and they want to create another quote unquote big lie, they will have the people in power who will give Trump those extra, what was it, 11,000 votes that he wanted in Georgia. Anthony, I think it's a frightening situation. And yeah, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Do you
So,
think it'll be remedied? Like, do you think anybody will be
mm,
held to account? Do you think anybody will be, because they're just arrested and charged insurrectionists, but they were only
mhm.
just doing what Trump told them what to do. So do you think that the actual instigators, who have turned out to be lawmakers, invariably the people that were behind this, do you think they will ever be charged?
Well, they're not responding to some of the subpoenas from the January 6th commission right now. Uh, so it seems like they're going to push it just to its very limits as far as trying to sidestep any repercussions regarding it. But they need to be charged. And I've been looking at some disturbing polls where large percentages of Republican voters condone political violence, or what think it's necessary. And it's startling the amount of people that believe the election was stolen, whereas quite the contrary, it was a miraculous feat that we were able to marshal our forces to get all the votes in during a pandemic. Something that should be celebrated and congratulated as people expressing their civic duty is being villainized in this lie. And yeah, Trump is one hell of a con man. He has
Yeah.
he's snookered the American public. So Anthony Davis, I don't have any answers for you, my friend, but
That's okay. I
I am
wasn't
I am
expecting answers, but I was just
yeah, but
interested to know
I'm of the
how it makes you feel.
I am of the same mind you are, and
Yeah.
it's it's the kind of thing that can keep you up at night, especially as you were saying, the gerrymandering and putting people in positions of power that could flip an election on a whim.
Mm.
Yeah,
Tell us what's coming up on your show today, Hal.
a little more lighthearted fare. We're gonna be talking some news, pop culture, and there's gonna be goofs, gags, jokes. So the first hour we're gonna be just checking out a lot of trending topics on Twitter, and then in the second hour it's going to be a little more pop culture heavy, talking about some of the shows to look forward to in 2022 currently. Talk a lot about streaming. I'm going to do a review of a very funny show on currently on Peacock, MacGruber. Are you familiar with MacGruber, Anthony?
I'm not even familiar with Peacock. I mean, I know it's a
Oh, okay.
spin-off from NBC, but I
Yes.
don't really watch television. So I occasionally watch something, like an episode of Succession, just to say I have. What would you
Sure.
say was the best movie of last year? Because I know you're a film buff. So what would you recommend? Something I haven't seen, which is
You know,
probably everything.
sure, sure. Well, a movie starring one of your countrymen, Benedict Cumberbatch, The Power of the Dog, was
Oh,
excellent.
I haven't
Yeah,
seen that.
yeah, just a psychological thriller, and it deals with a lot of issues that resonate today, like gender and sexuality, but also the performances are stellar. Kirsten Dunst, like I mentioned, Benedict Cumberbatch was terrific, and yeah, the entire cast was great. I'll give you two more. Licorice Pizza, the new one from Paul Thomas Anderson. It was just a wonderful, more light-hearted movie from Paul Thomas Anderson, who does a lot of heavy stuff like The Master and There Will Be Blood. Licorice Pizza was a delight. And one of the best performances of the year, Will Smith in King Richard, was that the movie is worth watching just for Will Smith. And the young lady, her name escapes me right now, that played Venus Williams, was the whole cast was great, but I was really impressed by that movie. And Will Smith, I think I think he's a front runner for best actor, in my
I
opinion.
saw the trailer for that. I like to go on the Apple Trailers app, and instead of going to see movies, I just sit for an evening and just watch 75 trailers and feel like
A lot, yeah, a
feel
lot of
like I've
times,
done it.
yeah, you feel like you've seen the movie after you
Right.
watch the trailer sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's great to meet you finally, because I've been watching your show for weeks now, and I really enjoy it. I normally, when I finish here, I just go put it on. So that's what I normally do.
Much
But
appreciated. And
I'm
Anthony,
thrilled to meet you. Yeah.
likewise. Likewise. Thank you. You inherently class up the joint with your wonderful accent. And but aside from that, I always enjoy your thoughtful perspective. So yeah, wonderful to meet you.
Thank you. All right. Take care, Hal. Hal's on the other side of this show in just a couple of minutes. I'm Anthony Davis. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. on Backchannel. Have a nice Wednesday.